My father was so poor that he used to study under the street lamp, so that because he couldn't afford to buy oil for his lamps in the house. Then he went to the Madras Law College, and there he also graduated with great distinction. And while he was there on the law college, he won a scholarship, the Gilchrist Scholarship, which enabled him to go to Scotland to do his law, and then after that to Harvard in America. The Brahmin community said he must do prayashchitam because he had crossed the seas and gone to the foreign land and all that. So he said, I'll do prayashchitam if you allow me to go around the homam with a beefsteak in one hand and a bottle of rum in the other. Then I will do the prayashchitam. My mother, she was quite spirited. My father asked her, will you be willing to marry me? So she thought for a while. She said, I'll marry you on condition that you educate me. From a very young age, we all started playing tennis, and every Sunday my mother used to have tennis parties. Then we all learnt horse riding. We used to go to the bodyguard lines and ride there. Swimming, of course, we learnt when we went to Padakat, to our home in Malabar, because we have a large tank there. And my grandmother taught us all to swim. So we were quite athletic and keen on sports. My father said, I don't want my daughters ever to be dependent, even after marriage, on their husbands, and my sons also mustn't think that they're inheriting money from their father, so they needn't work. So you must all have career-oriented education. And he was very keen that all of us should be educated in England. But when the time came for me to study, you see, the non-cooperation movement had started, and my mother was very much involved in it. So I also felt that India was going to get independence soon, and I didn't want to be away at that time. So I refused to go to England to study, and I said I'll join Madras Medical College and study here. Congress struggle, all the leaders who used to come to Madras, through my mother, I met them. And Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru especially, all the youth, we were very inspired by him. And in 1933, I remember when Bhagat Singh's case, when he was sentenced to death and all that, from Madras we collected thousands of rupees, the students, and sent it there. And we were able to organize a hartal. Though communication and all that was much more difficult and slower, still there was that binding force throughout India. People are very happy nowadays to get away with thinking that India was never a nation, which is absolutely wrong. India has always been a nation. After World War II, there was a great move by the British to enlist all the doctors in the Indian medical service, and the men were sent overseas with the various regiments, and women had to man the military hospitals in India. To avoid being called up to the Indian medical service, I decided to go to Singapore. In Singapore, I became very involved in the political aspect of this Indian Independence League and the Indian National Army, but it didn't have any active role for women, except I was put in charge of these refugees camps, and I used to look after the people who were ill. And also I got contact with many Indian officers, because they used to come to our dispensary to get medicines, and among them were two young officers, captains. One was Punjabi officer, Captain Prem Kumar Sehgal. Captain Sehgal was a really very handsome young Punjabi. We used to have very large arguments about their joining the INA, and finally they got convinced that it was the best thing. Actually, Rashtrihari Bose used all his influence, and Subhash Chandra Bose was brought from Germany, where he was, to Southeast Asia. He came by submarine. Halfway he came up to Madagascar in a German submarine. Then he transferred into a Japanese submarine, and he went up to Sumatra. From Sumatra he flew to Tokyo, and there he met the Prime Minister of Japan, General Tojo. After they met, and though they only talked through a interpreter, still after 6 hours, I think, of interview, Tojo said, "This man is not only a leader of India, but he is a leader of Asia." At the very next meeting, Netaji said, "Now I am appealing to all able-bodied Indians between the age of 18 to 25 to join the INA, because this INA is not a revolutionary army, whereas I want to make it a revolutionary army." And the strength of the INA at that time was between 30 and 40,000. But within 3 weeks, it was doubled. Netaji himself has said that he wanted to meet some Indian women. So Yellappa said, "I felt that I can take you, and so you can have your interview." So I was most excited. Netaji said, "And now I have got something to tell you which will probably shock you and surprise you. I want to start a women's regiment, a fighting regiment. I want the women to go on the field of battle and confront the enemy, because after all, women form half our population, and they deserve freedom as much as the men, even more," he said, because women have two enemies to fight against: the British as well as our old social customs, which are very unfair and unequal to women. He spoke in Hindustani, of course a very simple Hindustani, and I translated into Tamil. And my Tamil also was, especially for any political references and all that, was not so good. But somehow the message got carried on to them, because whenever he asked who is ready to join the regiment, and I would translate, they would all rush forward to say that they are willing to join. And we were able to get 1,500 women to join and form the Rani of Jhansi regiment. Oh, I felt very proud, but I can tell you that I was the worst shot in the regiment. I couldn't shoot straight at all, because I was always bothered about so many other things. What about the rations for tomorrow, and what is the training program for tomorrow? So I could never concentrate on the shooting. But we had some very good shots among the members of the Rani Jhansi regiment. And the first time we went on the firing range, when the Japanese also came to see, they said, Indian soldier, Indian woman soldier, very good soldier, very good soldier. That was the first time they acknowledged that we were soldiers and that we had any right to be. He was very particular. Whenever he used to see me, he said, "Your uniform is not ironed." So I said, "But in camp we haven't got an iron." So then he called his orderly, "Kundan Singh, ek jodi kapda कप्तान साहब के लिए तैयार रखना है, जब आएंगे और हमारा साथ कहीं जाना है वो देना है उनको." I had been working in a hospital for disabled people, so that was right in the middle of the jungle, and we thought that we couldn't be seen by the air, and there had never been any fighting there because it was not on any strategic point at all. But Netaji visited the hospital, and there were so many spies, they were out to get him. So the very next day our hospital was completely bombed, and many of our patients died because they couldn't get out even and get into a trench. We decided first to go into the still interior of Burma. There was a lake there called Inle Lake, and stay there as long as we could or till the war was over. The second night, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, I was woken up by a bayonet pointing to me. And I looked and I saw a Japanese soldier with a bayonet. And they tied us on trees, each one. And they said they'll go to their officer and find out what has to be done to us. So we were sure now this is the end. Then one officer came and he had a newspaper in his hand. And he was looking at the newspaper, then he was looking at me. Then he came right up and he kept the newspaper next to me and looked at me. And he went on and on like this. Then finally this man had us released. So we moved further into the jungle and we built our own hut there. And while we were there, we were captured by the British, and then they took me to their headquarters, the Force 136 this was. And we were made prisoners. But what prisoners of war? Because they were also a guerrilla group and they didn't have any prison or guard or anything. So they said, since you're a doctor, you can also help us here in the dispensary. This mass euphoria and hysteria used to upset me very much because I felt they really didn't understand what it was all about and what it meant towards the freedom of India, and just having heroes and heroines. So I used to really shy away from the crowds, because after a few days in Delhi, I came away to Madras. And that's when I saw the condition which our ex-INA people were, and I decided at least to see somehow to rehabilitate them. Soldiers, when they were being trained in bayonet fighting, they used to say, Maro dekho kecho, you know. That is, you maro them, and then you kicho, and then you take it out. So, whereas these other North Indian troops, you know, the Musalman used to say Allah Akbar when they charged, and the others say Jai Hanuman or Jai Ram Ji ki. But the South Indians say Maro dekho kecho, Maro dekho kecho when they were going into battle. And but they were very effective, so they really won the admiration of all the other. Netaji says there's no such thing as martial or non-martial. It all depends on the training and the motivation. And I am giving them both. I'll give them whatever training is available here. They will be given equally, and motivation is the freedom of India. But it's a very great pity that this achievement by the INA, and especially of these civilian volunteers, is not being recognized at all. People in South India especially don't even know about it. So I hope somehow that now